We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Pick a Disc. I'm your host Matt Latham and this is the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to, and then they come on and then talk about it. And today Liv Cowle is the guest and she's going to be talking about the war on drugs, Lost in the Dream. And we talk about the album. Of course we do. This is the whole premise of the podcast. We talk about the songs. Surprising we talk about the songs. You never expect that in a podcast about an album, would you? And also, we also talk about the personal connections that this album has and the band has with what she wants to do for a career. And there's quite a very good chat about the milestones that this band is associated with that. So before I decide to spoil more about the interview that you should really just sit and listen to, I'm going to tell you how you can follow us on all the Instagrams and stuff. There's only one Instagram, and that's Pick a Disc. There's also another social media, which is Twitter and Facebook, that you can also follow us on Pick a Disc. There's also the Discord server, so if you want a little chat community to come on and just say what you've been listening to, or talk to other music-minded people, or people who listen to music and other music podcasts, there's a little small community that's growing in the Discord server. So go onto the show notes, jump onto that, say hello. And yeah, I'll say hello back. Honest. Anyway, I'm rabbiting on again. I'm starting to rabbit on all the time. So I'm going to stop talking in a second. Because what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit play on the interview. And then we can all sit back and listen to Liv. So, read somewhere that you radio presenter for something called Your Radio. Is that, so what is that? Is that based on European music then? Or?
Yeah, so it was basically I studied geography and French out in Newcastle as my degree, and as part of that I spent my third year abroad. So I spent 5-6 months in Paris at the beginning of the year, just in a publishing house. But then in my second half I went to a beautiful city called Nantes, and I was working as a music journalist and culture journalist for a European radio station called EU Radio or Euradio. And it was amazing. It was so cool because I'd never had anything quite like that before, and they have such a focus on European music. So I was introduced to so many crazy, ridiculous artists, some of them really talented, some of them very niche. It was definitely a very special station. And they're still going really strong. So it's been great to see how they've been doing. Yeah. Anything
European which isn't from the UK that we've had, I think, is actually, on the day of recording, I think the only European act we've actually had is Aha, which is the episode that's just been released this year. So I think I think as I'm gearing up to the end this year, one of my goals is trying to venture into either non-English speaking or stuff. So that's quite interesting. That's kind of like a whole kind of feel I'm not really that much familiar with, but I just thought quite interesting.
Yeah, it's something we're not very good at here in the UK, I don't think. I think that we tend to focus on English-speaking music, whether those artists are from the States or from the UK or Australia or whatever, or even if they are French or German or whatever, as long as it's English-speaking, we'll play it. But if it's in Italian or if it's in German or French, we're not very receptive for that, apart from maybe the odd Pitbull verse, which is in Spanish. But I mean, it's pretty poor compared to the rest of Europe and maybe even the rest of the world, really. It's a shame because there's some amazing talent out there, some really exciting bands for all genres. I was very familiar with the French scene, but there was a lot of strange Slovenian artists that would come our way, and some really exciting Romanian dance house bands. It was just bizarre. You've got no idea how much is out there until you're thrown into the deep end of it. So definitely worth exploring.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just saw that on your website. And I was quite, that's interesting. I have to quickly ask that question. But unfortunately, we're not going to be mainland Europe. We're going to be flying all the way across the. I've forgotten the name of the ocean. Atlantic.
The Atlantic.
I've forgotten the name of the ocean for a second there. We're going to be going all the way across to the Atlantic for this episode to talk about an artist behind the album that you've picked. So before we carry on, Liv, why don't you tell the audience the disc that you've picked for today?
The disc I've picked today is the incredible album Lost in the Dream by The War on Drugs. It's one of my absolute favourites, and I'm very excited to be able to be talking about it today because people don't let me speak about things like this for this long. So thank you for the platform.
Yeah, speak for as long as you want about it. It's fine. So you briefly touched upon that, but why exactly? So why exactly this album?
This album is incredibly special to me for a few reasons. I think I discovered it in about 2017. So I would have been about 18 going on 19. I was in my first year of uni, coming towards the end of that year, and it was kind of summertime. And that period of my life was marked by a big move. I'd moved from Glasgow to Newcastle. I'd met all these new people, these new challenges and adventures, which was very exciting and not at all terrifying. But with that came a real exploration of my music taste. I think it broadened a lot when I was kind of 17, 18, and that kind of continued into my first year of uni. So the war on drugs fits into that time really neatly because, to put it simply, I'd never heard anything like them before. So when I came across them, it was just completely fresh and new and all consuming. And it was really special. I think it takes me back to that time in my life really easily. I think music is very good at doing that. If there's something particular about a record or about a time in your life when you hear it. So I think that I was keen to talk about it for a lot of reasons, but personally, it's one of my top favourites. It's up there.
Oh, okay, so you say it was like a tastemaker, or like basically something like a milestone. Yeah, it's I don't know if there's an exact term for it, but I know it's one of those concepts that's appeared a few times on this where people find an album, say, "Oh, this changed," or "This like helped shift my music taste and stuff." And I've got quite a few in them. What was your music taste like before the war on drugs?
Oh well, I grew up in a family that's very heavy on music. So my dad was a big fan of like prog rock and on Genesis and Rush and Dire Straits and stuff. So I had that in the house, and then my mum was a big fan of artists like George Michael and Delamitri, which was a great Glaswegian band. You might know a few of the big hits, but so it was a real mix of kind of rock and pop growing up. But then because I was listening to the radio a lot, I was relying very heavily on the charts giving me kind of a taste of what I liked and go, I like this song, or I like that artist. And from then you'd kind of go and maybe buy an album or ask for a record for Christmas or something. But when streaming services really blew up, so when Spotify hit, I must have been about 15, 16. And I think that changed everything for me personally, because it was a way for me to discover all these sounds and artists that I'd never heard of, and to realize that that was not only accessible, but very, very exciting. So I think it started to shift kind of when I was about 16, more towards a kind of alternative scene and some indie artists, and realizing that you could watch an artist on that journey. You know, it wasn't just given to you on a Radio 1. And obviously there are shows within Radio 1 that promote young artists or up and coming artists. But at that time I hadn't found anything like that. So it shifted towards the more alternative scene, the more indie scene in my late teens. I think the war on drugs fits into that, just towards the later side of that, thinking that there's an alternative scene that's not hitting the big charts, but are very successful and very good at what they do, but that I'm not hearing about, that I'm not being, given on a silver platter. It's my job to go and discover them, or they crop up in these exciting little ways, and it could be you hear it on a TV program or something, and then that's it.
Yeah, I think I can't remember the last time I listened to radio properly. I think was during my A-levels, I was about 18 or 19. This was all the way back in 2003, 2004, when, this was when Chris Moyles and Scott Mills were pretty much the 10 polls of your day on Radio 1. So this was like, early to mid nought stuff. But then I think it was MySpace and the file sharing stuff around that time that kind of got me into that. And you can kind of create, and then eventually when like streaming appeared, you can kind of curate your own kind of taste and stuff. And it gets
really clever with like recognizing what you like and saying, if you like these guys, you might like this, or we've noticed you're listening to a lot of this, why not stick with that or branch out or whatever. It's got so clever with all the algorithms.
I think before that, I think you had MySpace, which never had the power of the algorithm on, I've talked about that. I'm not going to go on to another spiel about why I miss MySpace that much, but MySpace was kind of like the precursor to that, where you kind of says, you like all these things, and you just click on, and you had to do a bit more work. You had to do a bit more work for it, unfortunately. But I quite like the idea that you kind of curate, you can create your own taste, and you discover these things. And quite a few of my favourite bands / albums in like the last 10 years have been because of either artificial intelligence telling me, you're going to like these, and I'm like, Skynet's telling me what to like.
I am the biggest skeptic of robots and AI, but I do have to thank it for that. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, opinions about Spotify. I mean, Spotify's got a bad rep at most times, but annoyingly, there's one thing it's good at, and it's scary. But
Yes.
heading back to your early stuff, you mentioned there's a band. They're going to get brought up again later on, which I found quite interesting. You mentioned Dire Straits.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the bands that your parents listened to, that you listened to when you was younger.
Yeah. My dad's a big fan of Dire Straits, so he a big fan of Mark Knopfler for the guitar skills and that. So I grew up listening to a lot of, Sultans of Swing and all those sounds I couldn't maybe name. I couldn't tell you what they were, but they were on the car or they were on in the house, in the kitchen. And so I grew up around that kind of sound. And it's interesting now talking about the war on drugs, because a lot of that influence comes through, I think, certainly on this record, the kind of the long instrumentals and the amazing guitar and all these riffs that come through, definitely.
Yeah, because I was listening to the War on Drugs. I'll jump to my disclosure. I mean, the only thing I ever knew about the War on Drugs is the name, and that he was married to Christine Ritter. That's all I knew. I knew nothing about it. I mean, I was fully expecting to hear something. I don't know why. This is like every single time it's like a band on this kind of name or kind of notoriety, I always assume they're going to sound like the Black Keys or be a lot more dirty, like White Stripe stuff. And then I think I accidentally clicked on, I think, a song from one of their latest albums, and it was kind of synthy and kind of smooth. And I'm like, originally I thought I picked on the wrong band, because I fully expected it to be kind of distorted, dirty, kind of like almost first Kings of Leon album style sound. And then this playing in, and suddenly I was again fully expecting Black Keys, and then suddenly Dire Straits and Bruce Springsteen were being played at me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's okay. I just kind of been like
pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. I was like, I gotta stop thinking that every band's gonna sound really kind of like heavy distorted guitars and effects pedals and stuff. But so was Lost in every time I've been searching for it, I've been typing in Lost in a Dream. So in the last few days I've been trying to train myself to say no, it's not, it's Lost in the Dream. So if I so if I call it Lost in a Dream by mistake, I apologise in advance. So was this the first album of theirs that you listened to, or?
Yeah, it was I think it's their third album, so they'd had a couple out before then, and I think it was some kind of Spotify algorithm that threw them up at me, or I was definitely listening to a lot of artists as a one-off and just exploring a lot while I was studying and doing a lot of essay writing and manic, in the zone stuff. So when it came up, it was the first of theirs that I'd heard, and I hadn't heard anything like it before, like I said earlier. And there wasn't any incentive for me to go back and listen to their old stuff at first, which was strange for me, because normally I'm like, well, this is good. Let's go and see how much else there is out there that these guys have done. Have they done the same thing for a long time, or is this a new direction for these guys? But I loved the album so much that I was like, I kind of don't want to risk tampering with this lovely ideology I have of this band. I kind of just want it to stay as it is for a little bit longer.
I don't know. I always think there's a kind of like interesting discovery to make. Like last year, someone picked a Goo Goo Dolls album from 2005, and from my research, people saying goes, oh, from their beginnings and stuff. And I was like, what I usually don't do, I usually don't listen to all the albums by an artist for an episode, but for that case, I listened back and they sound so much like garage band punk rock, and it's like ridiculous at how much the Goo Goo Dolls changed and stuff. But it's like a very looked at thing. Sometimes you can go back and listen back and you think, oh yeah, I think they found so similar. Or you can go back and like the completely different genre, and it's like, oh, okay, it's like when I finally listened to the early Idlewild albums, I was like, these are a lot heavier than I expected them to be.
And that can be a good and a bad thing as well, because if you look back and be like, because this is their fourth album and nothing has changed, you think maybe they should shake it up a little bit, or if they're doing it well, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But then on the other hand, it can be like, oh, they've changed a lot, or it's either gone really well for them, or you think, oh, maybe they should have stuck with what they knew best. But I think you can't fault an artist for trying something different. I think definitely people would rather be known for pushing the boat out than be known as just doing the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work in their favour, that being said.
Yeah. I think like it's probably a case of the band as well, probably say like, okay, we don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Sure.
We need to keep it interesting. We've done the same thing for 10 years. We need to do something new. So I've never begrudged a band for trying to do something different. Just whether they do it well, which is the...
That's it.
That's the question.
That's the deciding factor, isn't it?
Yeah. So, very briefly before we talk about the album as a whole for a second, for those who don't know who the War on Drugs are a American rock band from Philadelphia, formed in 2005. The band consists of Adam, is it Grand Duciel?
Grand Duciel, I think, yeah.
Duciel. The band consists of Adam Grisiel, David Hartley, Robbie Bennett, Charlie Hall, John Natchez, and Anthony Lamarca, and Eliza Hardy-Jones. Founded by close collaborators Adam Grandiciel and Kurt Vile, and I didn't realise that he was part of War on Drugs to begin with. They released their debut album, Wagon Wheel Blues, in 2008. Vile departed shortly after its release to focus on his solo career, and then released second album, Slave Ambient, in 2011. And then in 2014 they released Lost in the Dream, which was released on March 18th in 2014 through Secretly Canadian, and which recording sessions took over 2 years, and it was characterised by numerous rewrites, and the themes of the albums were influenced by loneliness and depression. Is it Grand Duciel?
I think so, yeah. Grand Duciel, or I'm not entirely sure where the pronunciation lies.
Okay, I'll just call him Adam. That Adam faced when he finished touring. And musically, the record was inspired by 80s rock, including Americana, with influences including Springsteen, Spaceman 3, Neil Young, and Crazy Horse. So, yeah, there's a lot of influences and stuff through that, that I want to touch on a bit later on. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier, that you mentioned when you was listening to this, so you listened to this a lot when you were studying at university and stuff, and it was pretty much a case of putting something on in the background, and you just kind of had it while you was working and stuff. I noticed that the first time I listened to it, I took it on when I was driving to work, basically driving up the M5, and quite a few reviews I've read referred to it as road trip music. And
yes, I can see that.
Yeah, and he's very driving, particularly with the first track. He's very kind of got driving drums for about so many minutes and stuff. But yeah, I can see how it's got an almost ambient sound to it. I mean, are you someone who has to have music on if you're doing anything at all?
I cannot sit in silence. It's it's a bit of a problem. I have music on constantly. If I am ever without my headphones, something is wrong. So when I found this album, it was on a lot in the background, but it became one that I wanted to listen to as well. It wasn't just something I wanted to have in the background. It was something that you wanted to pay attention to. Even listening to it again this afternoon just to get ready for this episode, I found myself just staring into space, just listening, like really listening to what it was doing and what it was portraying, because you said the word ambient there, and that's exactly how I would describe it. It's completely all-consuming. You are in that album. You're completely in this little world that the War on Drugs builds in this album. And I think a lot of that is down to the instrumental sound of it. So a lot of the layers and textures that are built up throughout the records, it's a lot of long instrumentals. I mean, it's not a short album by any means. It's 10 tracks, but it comes to about an hour all in all. So each track's like on average 6.5 minutes. It's crazy. So, but a lot of that is due to just long instrumentals that really portray this kind of mood and this feeling and this atmosphere that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to any older episodes of the podcast before you came on, but there's an ongoing joke that I have, an ongoing thing that I have where I have issues with long songs.
Oh really?
Yeah. John Parable, like, episode 40, referred to it as the Latham limit, where there's a point where how long it kind of changes, but how long does it take for a song to reach the Latham limit, where it goes on too long and stuff. Some songs do it. Thankfully, this didn't. I wasn't actually bored. I was actually bored. The fact that it was kind of like 7 or 8 minutes long didn't bother me that much, which surprised me. I think a lot of it.
That's a testament to them, isn't it? Yeah.
A lot of it, I think, is probably because I was pretty much driving, and I was pretty much driving anyway, and it kind of there's a weird thing that if you get context right, when you get context right when listening to music, it kind of it matches and it's easy to kind of listen to and stuff. And yeah, and it I mean, it was like 7 o'clock in the morning on a motorway, but the kind of under the pressure still going on when I've reached the motorway after about like 7 minutes.
It's like 8 minutes long. It's insane.
Yeah. I think he pretty much started transitioning to I think Red Eye's second track, isn't it? I think it moved on to that when as I was just going onto the slip road onto the motorway. Onto the motorway and stuff, and usually I'm usually about 2 or 3 songs deep into an album at that point. But he has that kind of like there's a soundtrack feel to it, almost like you could hear it.
100%.
You could theoretically you could hear it or feel that it will appear on like if you're watching a film or something and you've got like kind of like your protagonist just staring out into the ether or something. You could hear this coming through, or if there's like late night travel or something, you can hear this going through, particularly through like the American Midwest or something where it's like you're going up towards Arizona where it's all kind of like deserts and stuff. There's that kind of like feel to it, which is like and I was just listening to a podcast today at my friends We Dig Music. A couple of them been on this before, and there's there's the playlist they picked, and one of the tracks they had to pick was a 30-minute like static electricity thing, and Tracy, one of the panelists, like gave it 14 out of 20 or something, and everyone was the other two were confused about why she listened to that long, and she said, "Oh, it's context because she was sat down painting." She would sit down painting, and usually something she would turn off in like 30 seconds was actually nice for the ambient stuff, and you get that kind of. You kind of get that thing. I mean, I don't know if I was listening to it any other time, but it's very good driving music.
Yeah, definitely. I don't drive yet, but I can imagine that it would be perfect if you were like on a solo trip up the A9 to like the hills up in Scotland or something like that, and just having that blasting and just seeing where it takes you. I can imagine that being a really good feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you probably got that to come as well. Like you'll get your first car, it's like, okay, what music? Let's take this one.
Well, that's the only reason I want to drive is so that I can playlist it, basically.
Yeah, I think it's the same as well. I think most of my podcast listening is done through when driving to and from work.
Absolutely,
yeah, and like the same as well. But then I was catching up and like driving back from work today. I had this on, and it was like, yeah, okay, and I think I only got about a third into the album because the motorway was clear, but
yeah, so enjoyed it though.
So, considering that from what I'm reading, Benny, is this a breakup album? Would you say this is a breakup album? Or?
I personally wouldn't class it as a breakup album. I think that it's very open to interpretation, and I actually haven't thought too much about where the war on drugs, where this came from them. I hadn't thought about that too much until I was coming on here to talk about it and talk about the backstory and the influences and things like that. And it wasn't until I read some things about how it came about that I realised that he'd just split up from quite a bad breakup, and that was having a real effect on him. They had just finished this really long slog of touring. I think they were completely burnt out and exhausted after a load of travelling. And so I think when they wrote it, they were very much in a place of depression and complete exhaustion, and in some elements I reckon it probably is a breakup album for Adam personally, having written all this stuff. And certainly on tracks you see like suffering and maybe even disappearing. I'm not sure. The thing is with the war on drugs, I think that it's so emotive in the music. I think that brings the emotion across more so than the lyrics, which is rare for a band, and it's a true testament to their musicianship, because normally you get all the feelings of an artist through what they're saying and not necessarily how they're putting it across musically. And I don't know if you would agree with that, but I think that it's one of the best examples I have of how music can make you feel just from the sound and not necessarily because of the direct words that they're putting across.
Yeah, I think I'm much more of a lyrics person than a music person. So I'll read more stuff into an artist's lyrics more than the actual instrumentation of things.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think, asked me 2 years ago, I would have maintained that. I think doing this podcast has forced me to get into like the music side of stuff. But I think you can kind of feel that atmosphere through that, and that kind of like almost again the ambience and stuff, because it's as I said earlier, that it feels like it's a good soundtrack to driving. I'm commuting on my own, so so it kind of feels like it wouldn't work if you've got a passenger.
Yeah.
So like you're sitting there, you're sitting there like one hand on the steering wheel, one hand with your elbow on the window, staring out at, well, at the moment, British winter, British winter, and it kind of forces you to have that kind of almost melancholy kind of introspection. Is probably a better word for it. And I can't figure out where the quotes attributed to, but on Genius, he did say there's where on the recording process he said it wasn't a band record, it was a solo record, and I knew that.
Gosh.
They've all been solo records. And I think that's also about why the fact it's just him on the cover as well. So so again, I don't know how much about how they come to an album, but from the looks of it, it feels like it's him doing a lot of the work.
Yeah, I think he's certainly the main songwriter behind all of this. So it's not surprising that he feels that it's an expression from him and where he's feeling, and then the band helps bring it to life. So maybe that's a good way of putting it, so that he has the thought, he plants the seed, and then as a band, they bring it to life together. I was very lucky to speak with him as part of the rodeo about the most recent album, and he touched on Lost in the Dream about the difference between his place there compared to the most recent album. And again, when he spoke about the most recent album, I've literally just forgotten the name of it. I had it written up as well. But when he spoke about that, he was at a very different time in his life.
Is it I Don't Live Here Anymore?
Yes, I Don't Live Here Anymore, exactly. So it was about him shifting into fatherhood and turning 40, and this new chapter of his life that was foreign to him and at once very daunting and very exciting, and how he feels he's changed and how they've changed as a band, both musically and, personally. And so when you hear him talk about that, it definitely comes across as him just pouring everything out into the music and into the lyrics, but also the sounds, and helping bring it to life with the music. But I can imagine that he would find that very cathartic in one sense to explore all these things, as any artist would. I mean, I can't imagine how liberating that must be.
Yeah. Also, I think you just it as well. You talk about the rodeo. The rodeo is like a magazine that you're an editor of, and the War on Drugs was your first cover feature as well, wasn't it? So
it was, yeah. So that was for our second to most recent volume at the time of recording. So that was volume 13, and I was lucky enough to speak with him over Zoom. And it was my first cover interview. Yeah, hopefully not the last, but that will be up to our chief editor. So we'll see.
He was listening, the Right Honourable, and very gracious and lovely editor that you've got. Yes.
Yes.
I won't edit that bit out. I won't edit any of any of the compliments to him at all. But yeah, so yes, but yeah, you've got that kind of added kind of emotional attachment to this band as well now. So like you'll always have, so you'll listen to this, and okay, the interview probably wasn't about this album, but you'll look at it going like, but yeah, this band that I love is also one of my first.
Oh man,
feature, yeah.
It was such a privilege. I felt so lucky to have that. As with any artist that you get to speak to in music journalism, anyone that gives you the time to give you insight into their work it's just magical. It's really, really special. And it was especially important for me to get this right because I loved them so much and because I love this album. And I got a sneak preview into the most recent album, I Don't Live Here Anymore, and that was obviously amazing. But getting to hear the thought process behind this sound that I'd fallen in love with was just it was such an honour. It really was. And I hope I did it justice because it was a fantastic conversation. And yeah, it just gave that extra layer into not only the production, but the inspiration behind it all and what it must be like to be on that side of the music, the one coming up with it and pulling it all together and how it all, what works and what doesn't work. And it's amazing to hear, to be part of that.
When, slightly deviating, but I'll ask it now. What point did you want to get into music journalism?
So that would have been in my first year of uni again. So again, very pivotal time in my life, I think. So I left school at 18 from Glasgow, having no clue where I was going to end up. So I knew that I wanted to go to university. I was very geekish and good at school, and I enjoyed all these different subjects. And I did geography and French, as I mentioned, because I'm indecisive and can't stick to one thing. So when I ended up there, it was the perfect course for me. I'll say that. I've got no regrets about not doing journalism or media or anything like that. It was the right decision. But I had the right frame of mind in thinking that if I do these two subjects that I love and enjoy, hopefully it'll just steer me in the right direction. And it worked out that way. So when I got to Newcastle, I threw myself into the student radio, NSR, Newcastle Student Radio, which in many ways changed my life. I met the most amazing people, and it gave me the most incredible passion for music journalism in a way that I hadn't anticipated in the slightest. I thought, this sounds like a good laugh. I'll get to go and harp on about music and no one can tell me to stop talking. So let's give that a go. And instead I got something really amazing in return. I got a real passion, and I got an insight into, oh man, I can do this as a job if I really want to. So I think that was when I realized that that's where my true interest was. I wanted to talk about music, whether that was writing or broadcasting. So I think I was about 18 when I found that. So since then it's been is this just a hobby, or is this something that I can see myself really doing? And that time at EU Radio that we touched on earlier was a real deciding factor in saying, like, oh no, I want to get up every day and go and do this. I want to dedicate my time to this. I want to work hard and stay late and travel the world, and I want to give my time to this. So it's all spawned from then, really, but it all started at Newcastle Student Radio. God love them.
They got a lot to answer for, haven't they?
They really do.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. That's nice stuff. And how much? So, and that's probably since your music. So that's when you got to university, and then you kind of explored your music taste and stuff, and then that's when you suddenly realised, I like music. I want to kind of stay in this area.
It's like I don't want to make the music. I want to just, I want to talk about the music. I want to promote the good sounds that I'm finding. I want to be a part of bands doing a really, really cool thing here. That realizing I could do that, and it wasn't just some kind of side project, was a really exciting thing.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice to know. I think it's quite nice to, like, when you suddenly click. I mean, say what, I'm in my mid-30s, I still got no idea what I want to do. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, I feel very lucky, because I think for a long time I was like, oh, these people around me know they want to be doctors, or when I thought of journalism, I thought it was just the news, and I don't care about the news. I mean, obviously it's important to know what's going on in the world, but I thought there are other people that are more dedicated and passionate about bringing the news to people than me. That's not for me. So I didn't realize I could do this.
Yeah.
No one told me. They're hiding it from me.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's nice to know, to find that quite early on as well. So so, and I think we'll touch on I think later on I'll ask a couple of questions a bit later on about what other stuff that you've done as well. So but yeah, so if we head back to Lost in the Dream, if we talk about, so we go move on to the songs themselves. Which songs jump out at you? So when you think of this album, which songs jump out immediately when you think of this album?
It's got to be the opener. I think Under the Pressure is a really amazing piece of music. It's almost 9 minutes long, as you are well aware. And it sets the record up for what is a very exciting little bubble. It's almost like you're in the dream. I think that's very cliche to say, but I'm going to say it's like you yourself are lost in the dream. You are in this journey with them. So I think the opening track is a big one. Burning is one of my absolute favourites. I think the transition into that track as well. So The Haunting Idol is the track before, and it's just an instrumental, and it's very atmospheric, very ambient. There's a lot of strange kind of synth sounds paired with all the guitars and stuff that you can hear. And then all of a sudden, it's so subtle you don't realise it, but you're already on to the next track. And it's a seamless transition. And then it builds and builds and builds, and you realise that Burning is this suddenly very hopeful turn into the album, into this, maybe the third of it, if you like, the third act of the album, we'll call it. And it turns into something very hopeful and very exciting in a different way, because it's this different tone compared to this direct contrast to the last track. Burning becomes a really when you want to dance to, and you can feel the kind of expression that Adam is putting across, and the whole of the band is putting across, this almost wanting to shout and dance and have a little bit of a jiggle. You don't really know what you're doing, but you're going to do it anyway. And I think that's a really big one. Yeah. And then the last song as well, in reverse, is just amazing, just beautiful.
Yeah, I think if we head back to burning stuff, the burning, I think particularly when you had the haunting idol, which is an instrumental, I didn't really. I mean, at this point, I was like, okay, yeah, there's going to be long songs in this. Like sitting down, grasping the edge of the chair, going, yeah, long songs. But I didn't realise that the haunting idol. I didn't realise that the haunting idol and burning were two different songs. I thought the transition was that smooth. I didn't realise it was an instrumental.
Exactly.
But burning, I actually quite like burning. That's the one. If you played this and said, "Oh, this is a Dire Straits song," and tell me it was Dire Straits, I would have believed you. This is, and which is one of the
I know what you mean.
Yeah, and that's the reason I picked up on when you were talking about Dire Straits, because I'm wondering whether having that in the back, having that kind of not forced, but having that in part of your musical upbringing from your parents and stuff, whether listening to that kind of is that familiarity with that kind of sound is what drew you to the war on drugs. So I wonder if whether that kind of influence.
Possibly. I think if it is that, it's definitely subconscious. But it's interesting because it's one of the albums that I've sent to my dad to be like, you got to listen to this. You've got to listen to this. And he's come back and been like, oh, I love the wars on drugs. And I'm like, no, just war on drugs. And but it's interesting that comparison can be drawn, because it's one that he absolutely loves. He loves the sound, and he loves the different riffs and tracks, and that building of tension and excitement in the instruments and the layers of it all probably is very similar to Dire Straits, especially in that track. So it's possible that I just felt like it was something I knew I liked, and just thought, this sound is amazing and I want to hear it all the time and put it on repeat. So it kind of rolls, the whole track just rolls and rolls and rolls and builds and builds and builds, and before you know it, you're like, it's over, and I want to hear it again. It's great.
But yeah, I think I think with this as well, quite a few of the songs, I think burning is that what the war on drugs do quite well is that they generate the tension and resolution, and that's something that's been on my mind recently. Basically, because one of my favourite bands, Wolf Alice, is like a master at doing that.
I'm a huge fan of them.
If anyone listening to this has not listened to the episode I did with On My Love Is Cool with Jenna from the 93 Songs podcast, listen to that. It's just an hour and a half of me and Jenna just geeking out about how much we love that band. But one of the things that I think, particularly with Wolf Alice, that I kind of noticed when listening to it, and I think has kind of trickled into other stuff, is Wolf Alice have a master of like building up tension and then kind of resolving it, so they can somehow keep you enthralled for a good two and a half minutes before suddenly paying off. Like for example, like tracks of theirs like the Giant Peach, or even the Last Man on the Earth, where it just builds and builds and builds just before the like guitar solo. They just know how to kind of keep you
because they'll drip it in and then pull it back as well. They're like, no, not quite yet, and then you kind of, it's not till the third verse that something really kicks off. And not just an excuse to name drop Wolf Alice again, but that kind of technique I kind of felt through this, and I think that might be another that might be, if any bands want to surpass the Latham limit, that might be the way of doing it. Just try and get your tension and resolution sorted, because I think burning as well, and quite a few of the other ones, I think Under the Pressure was like, has that, if you particularly if you're doing something else at the same time, but you keep the tension going, like, oh, is this going somewhere, and the payoff, it kind of pays off. I think that with Eyes to the Wind does that really well as well. I think it builds nicely, and similarly with Ocean Between the Waves, I think each track is so distinctive in their own right. But what I love about the records, and what I love about any record that I love, is that it's a very much a piece of work that you can see that has been curated specifically for this, so that you know that the artist or the band has spent a lot of time figuring out which track goes where, how they fit together, how they transition, like we saw with Burning, and it dips and flows. So all the way through this record, either 3 tracks and one to the next, or even within a track, you have these peaks and troughs. So you have these really big ups and then it goes down again, and songs like Disappearing or Suffering bring it right down, and you are kind of suffering with them, or you're completely lost in whatever they're feeling. And then it goes back up again with things like Red Eyes or Ocean Between the Waves. It just kind of soars again. And it's such an immersive record. And I think that it comes across as a body of work because that's clearly how it's been designed. It kind of tells a story without telling it, if that makes sense. And that's, for me, that is the ultimate mark of a great album. It's one that tells a story and has some kind of either some kind of concept or some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Consistency.
Yeah, I think, or at least one that if you have to listen to it, you got to listen to it all the way through.
Don't shuffle it. Don't shuffle it. I don't know if that's been brought up on this, but anyone that shuffles albums needs to have a bit of a sit down and a talking to.
Yeah, exactly.
Not how they were made.
Yes.
You wouldn't just dip in and out of a chapter. You wouldn't skip bits of the film and go back to the beginning. Don't do it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, or a point where I mean, I'm not one for playlists that much either. Apart from perhaps for songs that haven't had and not been out on albums yet, I'm not much one for playlists. But to a certain point where if you end up picking up songs from different albums that you really like, and then when you listen to them on a playlist, you're suddenly not disappointed because the song that usually finishes that plays next isn't on that playlist that you haven't put it on. Then exactly, yeah. So like sometimes I'll like make a playlist of I've got a playlist on Spotify dedicated to just first songs. It's just basically first song.
I like that idea.
Yeah, so I've got like
that would mess with my head a bit though.
It does. Actually, quite a few of the albums like it's like watching the first 5 minutes of a film. You don't really just you're not going to watch certain bits of a film, or actually no, a better comparison. You're not going to take chapters of different books and put them into like a playlist. So you're not going to read like chapter 33 of War and Peace, and then you're going to go to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's not going to work properly.
Yeah.
But then again, I have got like a playlist of like first songs, and the first song is like Pretty Girls Make Graves with their song Speakers Push the Air, which is I think my favourite opening track of all time. And immediately after it finishes, I'm like, and then it kicks in with Song for the Mission from another art by the Sounds. I'm like, okay.
That would mess with my head. I don't think I could do that.
It messes with my head a bit, but like it's if I think it's gradually to unease me a bit, I think, just to keep me focused on other stuff.
I'm a big playlister. I'm a huge playlister, and I never understood it until I started things like streaming platforms like Spotify, and I realised that this was not only something I could do, it's something I was really good at. And that's not to toot my own horn, but I have some very good playlists out there, and I like making playlists for people in the way you would make a mixtape for somebody. But I'll order them specifically and I'll send it to them and say, please don't shuffle this. Please just listen to it start to finish. You want to hear this the way that I had it in mind, and either because it'll kind of peak it a little bit and then bring it back down, or you just think they go really nicely together for that kind of mood. Because I think for a playlist, what you don't get with a record is maybe a consistent mood, if that's what you're looking for. Maybe an album has a few songs that are really upbeat and other ones that are a bit slower, and sometimes you just want to listen to the slow stuff, and sometimes you want to really dance around to the big stuff. So what's really fun for me to do is pick different ones. I think a lot of people will be able to identify with that, is picking ones that shouldn't go together but do, and you throw them in this kind of melting pot of playlists and send it to people who don't care. They didn't ask for this, but they're getting it anyway. And sometimes you get reactions that are like, you know what, this works, this is really good. And other times you think, they're not going to listen to that. That's okay. That's just me.
I don't know if you're like me, but usually I'll end up just putting a few playlists in, and then I'll just start playing a song, skip to the last 5 seconds, and then just see how it moves on to the next 5 seconds.
Oh yeah. Only way to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the point otherwise?
Yeah, and if like, now that doesn't work, play it, like, shuffle it around, play the last 5 seconds of that track. Okay, yeah, that moves. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
definitely.
So, I'm glad I'm not the only one that does that. But heading back to putting it into the context of the album as well, I think like I'm assuming that if you listen to Under the Pressure on its own, and then suddenly Red Eye doesn't kick in, then that'll be weird.
It is a bit weird. I think especially because Under the Pressure is very much like you say, it's like an opening chapter. It is like it's, you know, inviting you into this record, so to speak, because it's so long, because it goes in so many movements. It feels like you're already watching some kind of film. And it's bookended really nicely by In Reverse at the end. So what Under the Pressure does in terms of building that tension and building that pressure, I think is resolved in Reverse. We get this kind of slow start and this build, and then it kind of is resolved really neatly on this beautiful sound at the end. And it just feels like everything that happened in the middle was, you know, lovely and great, but it definitely feels bookended in the same way that Blue Weekend is by Will Fallis. I think you have the beach parts 1 and 2, they're kind of designed together, and that's more deliberate because you have almost like a reprise of the first song. But I think in a less explicit way, Lost in the Dream does the same thing. It kind of bookends the record really neatly. And so it probably would be very strange to listen to an album of a playlist of first songs and have Under the Pressure come on. I think I'd be very confused.
I say try it. I say try it and just see how you get on, because it's...
Do you know what? I'm willing to give it a go. So if you send a link across, I'll definitely give it a go.
But yeah, so what other songs did you want to mention while we're here?
I think we touched on The Haunting Idol, but that's one I think I'd like to go back to, purely because I think it represents so much for the album in a way that you could completely overlook. I think that you want to go for the songs like Ocean Between the Waves or like Red Eyes on this album that can be played independently and can be played with other songs around it, either on a playlist or just on a one-off, like a single. But The Haunting Idol only belongs in that album, I think, if that makes sense. I think that if it's to be on a playlist, it has to be with other instrumentals, like with Brian Eno or someone like that, you know, very kind of atmospheric and synthy and dark and gritty. But I think the word haunting in the title is very much how that feels for the rest of the track, and then it completely shifts and goes into burning. But I think it's not one I give an awful lot of thought to, because it's so easy to just think it's part of another track because there's no other lyrics. It feels like it's, you know, part of either the song before or the song after. But it's almost 3 minutes long and it's beautiful. It's really lovely, and I would never just sit and listen to it on its own. But I think that's a testament to, I think I'm a big fan of like interludes and instrumentals and albums that have these interludes, as I call them, these little intervals of just sound and music that tie either different halves of the album together or tie two songs together. One of my favourite bands is Lord Huron, and they do that really well. So their most recent album, Long Lost, has a couple of interludes that are it's just somebody speaking almost, and it kind of ties together, or it's just maybe 30 seconds of music. Same with Alt J, they do it great on their first album. I think it's just a really clever thing to do, and to be able to pull that off, you have to really understand what you're making and what you're putting across. I didn't know I had this much to say on it actually until I started, but we're here now, and I think it's a really special one because I myself overlook it a lot, but it's only when I listen to it as an album. Like, I've got the vinyl, I've literally got it here, which is beautiful. And it's how I know it's one of my favourite albums I've ever is because when I first got a record player, it was one of the first vinyls I bought. And I knew that I wanted a physical copy. I wanted to hold it and be like, this is mine. No one can take this away. Spotify can crash, but this is forever.
Funny you say that.
Yeah.
Funny you say that. I think the first vinyl that I actually had was one that I ordered accidentally because I thought I was ordering a CD. Because I didn't have a record player. I think there's a local band from Birmingham called Ace Bushy Striptease, and they had their fifth album. This was in 2012, but they didn't have it finished. So they had like an order form that you paid for, and they'll post it out to you. And it was I only paid 10 quid. So I thought, okay, I thought it was the CD, and then about 3 months later, had this massive kind of like 12 by 12 cardboard flat thing appear.
Brilliant.
I got home and Mum went, "Oh, this is a pay for you," and I went, "What the hell's this?" And then basically came out with I got it. Annoyingly, none of my I know it's on the actually it's on a frame on the wall. That's why I can't find it. Yeah,
That's
so
a
it's
nice
basically,
idea.
yeah, so I basically got this 12-inch, like, record, 12 by 12 inch by 12 inch thing. I'm like, I can't play this. And it took a couple of years before, basically, not having a record player was my excuse not to waste money on vinyl until my parents
Yes,
got me a vinyl record player a couple of years later.
it's an
And
absolute money pit. Yeah,
yeah,
it really
and
is.
my original point being is that the first album that I actually bought since I had a record player was My Love Is Cool. So
Oh yeah,
yeah,
beautiful album, really lovely.
again, that was like the first thing that I deliberately bought since having a record player. Was like one of my favourite albums of all time. So I
Yeah.
kind of get that. But yeah, but quite like the idea that like songs that belong in certain points and you can't move anywhere else. The closest analog I think of is, again, I don't want to say book chapters again. What I'm thinking of is perhaps network television from the US, where you'll have standalone episodes of a television episode that you can probably recommend people saying, oh, I want to get into this TV show, what episode do you recommend? Oh, look at this one. But then you'll have some programs where that doesn't work, so you can't just like, there might be a couple of random episodes of Mad Men that you could theoretically watch, but then you couldn't.
Yeah.
There are some that you like. One of my favourite pieces of TV is The Suitcase from Mad Men, but I cannot show that to someone out of isolation.
No.
Yeah, and I think
Absolutely not.
the same thing happens with albums. I think where you can't you're saying the Haunting Idol, you can't just that can't be someone's
Yeah, you
entry.
can't just chuck that out there. You have to let somebody experience the full thing and think this is a song in itself. This isn't some kind of extended outro or some extended intro. I had that with Bon Iver's album. There's a song that leads out of the debut, and I've actually just forgotten it. It finishes off after Creature Fear. So it's on Frema Forever Ago. And one of my favourite, let me just get it up before I talk nonsense. Yeah, so it's called Team. And I didn't know that it was a song. So it finishes, Creature Fear ends. And because it transitions so beautifully into what is a standalone track, I just thought it was an outro for the whole time. It's about 2 minutes long. And until I maybe bought the vinyl or looked at it properly, because normally we would just stick it on, let it do its thing and go and do something else, or not look at what track was playing, if that makes sense. And so I just kind of assumed it was a big outro. And then, so again, one of the most beautiful tracks on there, you can't send that to somebody because it's not going to make any sense.
Yeah.
It's not going to make any sense at all.
Yeah.
But you couldn't move it anywhere else in the album either. It belongs there.
Yeah, and I think from my personal history, I don't really want to go into it that much because, one, I keep bringing them up. It's my favourite band. I keep bringing them up. And two, it's an album I want to talk about for the 100th episode, so I'm not going to skip that. But there is a case where there's a song in the middle with a song in the middle, but then there's two instrumental pieces on the side of it. So it'll cut in with like a 30-second kind of bit, have this song, and then it kind of ends with another track with like a 30-second stuff. And but you can't. But the one in the middle you could send people to listen to, but the two around it you couldn't do.
Yeah.
But yeah. So so what else? Any others before we move on? Any like last song you want to release?
I think those are right.
Okay, so the reception of this album. So from what I can gather, Metacritic is under the belief that this is perhaps the best album of 2014, purely on the basis that it topped 13 of 139 year-end lists and appeared on 54 of them. So
that's something. That's amazing.
Yeah, so the Metacritic algorithm said it was the most critically acclaimed album of that year. And it's, in terms of different lists, I always quite like to bring up the Pitchfork review, because the Pitchfork reviews are always entertaining. This is the most boring Pitchfork review you've had because it's an 8.8, and what I found is that positive Pitchfork reviews are a bit dull, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What I've just found that like when Pitchfork reviewing stuff like Reputation with Taylor Swift and giving it a 6.5, it's a lot more entertaining. Or Mika's Cartoon Motion, a 1.5. It's a lot more
great album. Don't care what anyone says.
Yeah. That is actually the next episode after this. I'll edit this
really?
bit. Yeah.
I'll
So
have to listen.
yeah. So we've got the next episode will be Mika, and then it'll be this one. So yeah, you're following.
It's funny,
Mika.
we were talking about music in different languages. Have you heard his French stuff?
No.
Very good. Really, really good. There's a song called Elle me dit, which means like she tells me. And it's an absolute bop. And no one knows about it because everyone just knows his English stuff. But I think, is he Swiss or Belgian or something
Lebanese.
Like that?
I think he's British.
Oh, right.
I think he's Lebanon. He was born in Lebanon, I think, but he's British.
He has some French-speaking ancestry, whether it's his mum or his dad. I'm not entirely sure, but I can't remember, and I'm not going to try and guess. But it basically means that he grew up with some kind of French around him, and so a lot of his music is in French as well. And it's really cool to listen to because it's very poppy and very distinctively French if you know the kind of French pop scene, but it wouldn't do well here. It's interesting, but you should definitely have a look because if nothing else, it sounds good and it's good to dance to, even if you don't know what you're saying. It's good fun.
Okay, yeah. So and it's an 86 out of 100 based on Metacritic as well, based on 40 reviews, indicating quote unquote universal acclaim. So it's just the reception bit is just loads and loads and loads. I think it's it was second in the top list of The Guardian.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, it was ranked number 2 on Mojo, American Songwriter, Music OMH, Stereo Gum. Album of the Years, it went on Uncut, Q, Under the Radar, Consequence as well. Just absolute loads and loads of stuff. I'm not going to... It's just basically had a lot of positive stuff. I'm not going to spend ages going through a load of them. Then again, though, if you want to... There is a bit of criticism from the 405 where Mike Walmsley said that the second album... the second half of the album, unfortunately, as they pass the Midwest on their road trip, the Mustang appears to run out of gas. So that's the only negative thing I could find about it. So
that's interesting. Did they give any reason behind that, or was it just kind of didn't enjoy it as much?
I'm not sure. I didn't go too much into the actual review itself because there was just a load of them. There was just a load of them. So yeah. So have you ever seen them live?
I haven't. I'd love to. The closest I've come is listening to their live album. I don't know if you've heard that, but it's one I almost picked for this episode, actually, strangely. It completely changed my opinion of live albums. That totally changed over the pandemic for a lot of reasons. Yeah,
I wanted to touch on that because the interview that you have as well, because she go on to talking about listening to live drugs. And like just basically how you missed live music and everything, and it's like reading down going like, yeah, I completely understand that kind of thing, where there's a bit where you talk about like being stuck in a flat and then basically, and you said I found solace in the recording of our Glastonbury recordings. The amount of YouTube videos of basically mobile video I ended up watching is ridiculous.
It was amazing.
But and like just basically on there, the first, I think it was June last year, after about 15 months of not seeing live music, the moment there are certain things that I never thought you miss, like for example on the R2 academies they have those weird kind of little pen things that scan the barcodes, and they've got a very distinct saying that did I heard that.
I know exactly what you mean.
I was walking I think I was seeing BB Doobie at the O2 in like last September, and basically walked past and I hear was and I'm like, it was like, I don't know, just like, just triggered stuff and everything. And then, but the live music cliche that got me the first time I heard it, again, I think it was like the second gig I went to was actually because the first one I went to was just like a free kind of showcase where it was just more or less just people with acoustic guitars. But then when I went to like a local band doing like an album launch in like August, and basically it was one of the support acts just went up and went, can I get more of the singer in the monitor? And I'm like, yes. I was like, because I remember thinking, guys, if I just only wish for some band member to say that they want to hear or more or less of someone in the monitor. That's one of those things that you just guarantee will hear You don't hear it on the arena tours, but like all the smaller venues, you just
All
hear
the
that.
small gigs.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but it's those kind of things. But you catch that kind of thing in that interview about how you miss that live
Thank you.
aspect of
Yeah.
it. But the Live Drugs album, that's the closest you've got to them.
Yeah, I think it's obviously not the same thing, is it? But it's a very good insight into what they would be like live. And what I mean by that is not how they perform, because you can't see it, obviously, you're just listening to it, but you get all the extended instrumentals and the way they play with it. And when a really skilled artist or band takes the stage, what you hope for is something different than the recorded album. If you want the recorded album, stay home, listen to it, enjoy it, that's fine. But if you want to see them really play and perform and do what they do best, go to a gig, because you see them loving it. You just see them having the best time on stage. And to be fair, a lot of these bands have been touring for a long time. They are bloody sick of these songs by now. So they're having to come up with new ways to keep it exciting, not only for their audience, but for themselves as well. And that was something that Adam and I talked about in the interview, is he was saying that when they were performing on stage and when they were putting the Live Drugs album together, it became something for the fans to kind of put out mid-pandemic to keep them, hopeful for the future, and a little taste of what it would be like to see them live. But then also it was a way for them to reflect on how they perform previously with albums like Lost in the Dream or the previous ones. I've literally just forgotten. What's the other one? A Deeper Understanding. That was another one, 2017 or so that came out. And it was looking at how they performed those songs during that time and how they want to do it differently going forward as well. So he was saying that they'd love to play with some kind of more orchestral sounds and having maybe some strings on stage and putting a real show on, not just playing these songs that everybody loves and knows, but putting a new spin on these tracks that everybody's come to see. For an album launch and for an album tour, you want to hear these songs that are put on the recordings, but for the old classics, and I would put Lost in the Dream as a classic for them now because it's almost 10 years old, it's 8 years old now. And when they go and do their next tour, what you hear in Live Drugs is a hint of them playing with that sound and playing with these old tracks that they know really, really well and that they want to try and do differently and put across, whether that's an acoustic version or an extended instrumentation where you get really lost in it because you're like, oh, I don't know this version of this song. What are they going to do next? And the beautiful thing about Live Drugs as well is because although it's a compilation album by nature, obviously they've just picked these different recordings from their South America tour, their USA tour, wherever they've been. They come from all different times and different time zones, but it flows together really neatly. Again, they've sat down and they've really looked at how each song and each version of each song flows into the next and where each one belongs. And it's a great one to listen to. You can hear the sort of the crowd and you can hear these guys really having a great time, and it's so authentic. I would love to see them live. I think it'd be a real treat and a real show. They do it right.
Okay. Yeah, because I know they're currently touring. Well, yeah, they currently tour in the UK. In fact...
Are they?
Yeah, so the day this comes out is quote unquote, yesterday. Yesterday they played Birmingham. So the day... Excuse
me while I try and wiggle my way into those. Oh my gosh, I didn't realise that they were touring.
Yeah, so they start in Birmingham on April the 11th. Then, quote unquote, today they're at the O2. They're in Dublin on the 14th. Leeds.
Are they playing Glasgow?
No, they're playing Edinburgh twice.
Well, good try. I'll give it a go.
So they're playing. Yes, I did have a quick look, but it's like about £40 a ticket, which is
yeah.
Considering I kind of took me ages to because I was reviewing the Wolf Alice gig for a website. I got in, but it was £30 for a Wolf Alice ticket, and I had to kind of stop myself and go, ooh. But so
it's amazing. I think I've noticed over not only after the pandemic, but over the last couple of years, I think gig prices have gone up quite a bit. And it's most noticeable in smaller artists. So artists like Jungle and Alt J are now £40 a ticket. And I think that's a lot.
Yeah.
And that's not because they're not worth that, but it's just surprising because it's gone up by about 15 quid. And it's just a lot. It is a big difference, especially for the more alternative scene. And when they're playing venues like the O2, I didn't expect to pay £40 to go and see an O2 gig, but here we are. So
yeah, I think on the day of recording, we're going back in time, wink, to March, obviously, where and not April. The Saturday, churches are playing the O2 Academy in Birmingham, and that's about 35 quid. And I love churches, and I'm like,
see, I would have thought that although churches are a great band, but I would never have thought that.
I looked at the ticket and like, so I haven't bought tickets to churches, and I'm like, ugh, because that's like 30.
It's hard.
I think 30 is like my kind of maximum limit that I usually get to, but depending on who they are. But
I wish I had that self-control.
But yeah, my mindset goes that 30 quid. That's like three smaller gigs, and I can get to and I'll be able to get to the front of them because the room won't be as busy. So, but yeah,
right.
so, yeah, that's how my mind works with these. That's like the most. I think I mentioned this before. Actually, I'm pretty sure it was the Mika episode because we talked about Matt, the guest, talked about that Mika was like the tickets for a Mika gig a few years ago was 80 quid. Yeah, we so
wow.
Yeah, because he asked me to guess and I guessed around 60, but he said it was 80. But yeah, so yeah, because that topic came up. At the time of airing, the War on Drugs are currently touring, which is something I've never said on this podcast before. So they are currently touring now.
God, I wish I'd known that. I would have paid more attention. Maybe I'll still get a ticket, or somebody on Facebook Marketplace will be less inclined to go.
But yeah, so I don't know. There's Edinburgh, I think is. Yeah, there's some in Edinburgh, but then they go to mainland Europe. And then into America, and then Europe again. No, that's
well, if anybody does have tickets that's listening, I'm extremely jealous, and I hope you enjoy it. It will be very good live. I've got no doubt.
So,
not at all bitter.
We briefly touched upon the Live Drugs album, but are there any other? So, if people have listened to Lost in the Dream, and want to go on to other War on Drugs albums, where would you recommend they go to next?
I think their most recent album is a really good place to go. I Don't Live Here Anymore is a really interesting record. It's quite different, I think, to their sound on Lost in the Dream, which is very atmospheric and very ambient. I Don't Live Here Anymore is very distinctively them. You can tell that it's their sound and it's definitely this band, but as I mentioned before, it's a different time in their lives, and that definitely comes across in the sound as well as the lyrics. So there's a lot of focus on time and getting older and the past and the future, and a lot of themes like that come through, which is a really interesting thing that they play with. And it sounds great. It's a really good, probably a great road trip album again. And then I think the other album is A Deeper Understanding, which is a lovely album. It doesn't compare for me. I think Lost in the Dream will always be number one, but that's because it's the one I found first and fell in love with first. Who's to say if I'd found A Deeper Understanding first, that maybe would have been, I like to think not, and I think I know deep down it wouldn't be. But I think A Deeper Understanding is a lovely album as well. Very similar to Lost in the Dream in the sense of the mood it puts across and that kind of building of layers and synths and textures. And so if you like this album, I would recommend going and listening to that. I haven't really listened to A Slave Ambient that well. I know it a little bit, but it's one I'd like to go back to and listen to properly, because what you get from they've now released 5 albums, so I Don't Live Here Anymore is their 5th one. So you probably get a great little journey of them as a band over the last 15 years, 17 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what song it was, but when I first went onto them in Spotify after you emailed me saying, "Oh, I'll choose this album," and I accidentally played from one of their newest albums, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And this was not what I was expecting. I think it was from the latest one. So I was like, "Okay, this is weird." And I wasn't expecting this, but I do want to get. I probably will check out that latest one because I'm quite curious.
Yeah, definitely. It's got a lot
So
going for it. It's definitely a lovely piece of work, and it's a great contrast to this album. I think there's a lot of really interesting sounds and themes on it. They address it feels very serious, but not in a down and dark and blue way. Just you can tell that they're trying to say something. It's interesting, very interesting.
oh, okay, and okay. So now we're here as we're getting up to the end of the main part of this. Now, there's a very very important. The most important question of the podcast, which is the song for the playlist. Now, for those who are listening for the first time, what this is that I'm going to ask Liv to pick one song from Lost in the Dream, and I can't veto it. So any song that Liv will pick will be Most Lives Forever on the playlist. And considering how some of them are really long, this is my usual spiel about long songs. But this time, a lot of them didn't bother me. So a lot of them didn't bother me. So if you want to pick one song to go onto the playlist, which would you pick?
This is a really tough question, and I thought about it a lot today because I went back and forth on it. I think
I've had people change their mind during the episode,
yeah.
and at some point, like debating themselves about do I do this, and this bit. So yeah, so feel free to antagonise over.
I think that the song I most listen to. This isn't the one I'm going to pick, but the song I most listen to when I'm not listening to the album in full, like if it's on a playlist or whatever, would be Burning, but I'm not going to pick that one for the playlist. The song I've chosen is In Reverse. It's the closer, and I think it's just lovely. I think it's so pretty, and I think it's got a really clever way of shifting tone because it starts off really gentle. You can hear kind of waves pulling in and out on a beach, kind of tying in with Ocean Between the Waves earlier in the album. I think it sums up the album really nicely without being too direct. I think it's got an amazing sound to it. And like I said before, it kind of goes to and from sounds. So it kind of starts off gentle, builds a little bit, and then resolves as every album closer should. And I just think it's the most beautiful ending to an album. And it's a lovely one. It's a really lovely one to go back and listen to on its own as well. So that's the one I've chosen, and I know it's about 7.5 minutes long, nice, but because nice. it's in different parts, so it doesn't feel like that long. It feels like a few movements, if you want to be poncy about it, in one. So that's the one I've gone for.
So In Reverse is added on to the playlist, and the song before it hasn't aired from an episode that hasn't aired yet. I'm talking about that. So because we're talking about playlists, so do you want to know which song In Reverse
Please.
will follow? It will follow Big Girl, You're Beautiful by Mika.
My favourite one off that album. I am not unhappy about that. That is one of my... I remember being about... I must have been about 8 and I had the CD of Life in Cartoon Motion. I still do somewhere. And I used to play it in the car on the way to my dance lessons in the morning. On a Saturday morning, I'd be driving to ballet. Not personally, but, I'd be in the car on the way to ballet. And I've got such a vivid memory of Big Girl, You're Beautiful being one of those big songs that we all knew the words to and was very silly and a lot of fun. And so, yeah, do you know what? A great precursor to In Reverse, although quite different.
Yeah. That's going to be a very interesting shift in the playlist, in a playlist that's full of them. But
yes. How many are on the playlist now? How many?
I think I'm gradually guilding. I think this is episode 85, but that will be 84. This will be the 84th because there's a couple of episodes that either playlist or weren't on Spotify, and there's one, and I think there was a live album, a Bob Seger album actually, which actually saying that Bob Seger was a name that was compared to War on Drugs, who had. I put the two in because the two flowed with each other in terms of the track listing, but so this is episode 85, but it'll be the 84th track on the playlist. So In Reverse will now immortalised forever in the Pick a Disc Hall of Fame playlist. So, and we're at the end of our main chat now. So, if people want to find you and the things that you're involved with, where can they find you?
You can head to my website, which is livcowle.com. That has a lot of the main things you need to know. So that has my writing stuff for the rodeo. You can also visit that at therodeomag.com. Same handle for Twitter and Instagram as well. Our latest issue, volume 14, just came out recently with Yard Act as one of the cover artists. And obviously they're in a really exciting time in their careers with their debut album completely rocketing up the charts. So they were really, really cool to talk to. I think it was it Nick or Jack that took that interview. But we're an amazing collective of writers, and I can say that as somebody that's been involved pretty much since the beginning. We're all volunteers, and it's just such a passion project. The rodeo really is the best place, I think, for people to come and experience new music, and not just new artists, but collectives and organizations working within music that are doing something exciting and doing something different. So as well as all of our interviews and album reviews, we have different features, and that can range from anything from something really silly to something really profound. So we had an artist called CMAP come on and do an essay about her journey in music, and that got quite profound and insightful, and that was quite a contrast to the stuff we normally write, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and we're all very good at what we do, I like to think, but it's we have a distinctive style. So if you want to find out more, you can head to therodeomag.com. You can find me at Liv Cowle on Twitter. That's Cowle, Cowle. And yeah, so that has all of my stuff from not only the rodeo, but I will hopefully end up in radio down the line. I currently work for Bauer as a creative writer, so I write adverts, which is quite a lot of fun. Actually, I'm really enjoying that. But you can hear any of my broadcasting experience through EU Radio or from my podcast that I did with Transition Roundhouse. That's called The Here and Now. That's also on the website. So yeah, for anybody listening who clearly is enjoying music podcasts, go and have a wee listen to that as well, because there's some really cool people that came and spoke on there.
Yeah, I ended up listening to the whole of The Here and Now.
Oh, thank you. All of it.
Actually,
I didn't bore you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the episode's quite short, actually.
Yeah, I try to keep them under half an hour usually.
Yeah, there's quite informative as well. There's quite a wide spectrum of different topics that I found quite interesting, particularly time. I think a lot of it had the background of COVID as well, but like, for example, like the influence of, I think in the first season you had the two musicians talking about how Brexit was going to impact.
Yes.
Brexit was going to impact the.
Yeah, that was an amazing episode. That was the very first one that we launched, actually. So I had Jess Murphy and Lizzie Ball come on and speak about the impact of Brexit on touring in the EU and vice versa. So EU artists coming to the UK, because they are both incredibly talented violinists, and so they don't tour with bands as maybe you and I would think of them in terms of going and seeing Wolf Alice in Berlin or something like that, but touring with people like ELO, or getting a call and having to go and fill in for somebody in France, and doing all these amazing work that they do in more kind of orchestral classical sounds, and the way that Brexit would impact that in some really sinister ways and very subtle ways. So one of the really interesting things that Lizzie brought up was the truck policy that had been brought in. So something about the restrictions that had been put on trucks and lorries in the EU or in France. So you had to have some kind of permit. Basically, you couldn't stop more than 3 times in France or something like that. So you couldn't take something from, let's say, Calais to Lyon, and then Lyon to Paris, and Paris to Annecy or wherever. You had like a limited number of stops you could do, and that was causing really big problems for bands that were trying to get equipment to and from places, or trying to get from one site to the other. I don't know the ins and outs of it. It was a while ago that we did that chat, but it was shocking because it was something that was part of a wider policy, but would have a really huge impact on the music industry and on the touring industry in general, that nobody was talking about. It was just shocking to me that there was so much that was at stake, and so much of it was quite subtle, and just would have this logistical nightmare for anybody trying to, especially younger artists, not younger artists, but more up and coming artists who maybe don't have a huge budget to go touring anyway. Now they have to fork out for licenses and visas and God knows what else. It's just such a nightmare. It really is. It's not getting better either by the looks of things.
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting with that, particularly with all the kind of like extra red tape that suddenly appeared and costs that appeared, like all the like. And because I remember like infographics being about visas and stuff, and I'm not going to go on too much because I'm going to descend into being a political chat, because I don't want to start ranting about how stupid Brexit is, but yeah, I think Here and Now was like quite a very interesting podcast with a wide variety of different things as well. So I fully recommend that as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I also did read issue 13 of the radio as well. Particularly quite like the fact that even though I know the soundtrack, but I've still not watched the film yet. The Josie and the Pussycats little little thing about the music and stuff. I keep meaning to watch that film. Harry Alphonse and I forgot. I think it's Deborah something. Basically, they only directed one other film, and it's one of my favourite films of all time, which is Can't Hardly Wait.
Right.
Yeah. The only other film they directed was Josie and the Pussycats, and I've always meant to watch it.
I haven't seen it myself, actually. Yeah.
But I know the songs because I think a couple of songs were written by Adam Schlesinger, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago because of COVID and stuff. So, but yeah, it was entertaining read anyway. So I'm looking forward to. I came in to get the next issue because Sunflower
Bean. Yeah. So we the last few issues we've released 2 covers. So we had Yard Act and Sunflower Bean as the cover stars of volume 14, and we had The Japanese Breakfast alongside The War on Drugs for volume 13. So we had the likes of like Declan McKenna in volume 10 as well, and Alex Cameron and Orville Peck as well as he's a recurring visitor for us. So we've got some incredible artists, well known or completely undiscovered, and it's been really exciting to watch them do well as well. So I spoke with Alfie Templeman in volume, would that have been volume 7 or something like that, volume 9? And at that point, he'd only released a couple of EPs, and I'd known him for a few years previously because of just Spotify throwing things at me and me lapping it up as I would normally do. But then since then, I've heard him on Radio 1, and he's doing really well. And it's that journey that I was talking about earlier, being part of that as a music journalist. It's really cool to watch. It's really incredible to watch somebody that you believe in from the beginning go off and do well. And it can work the other way, but you can be quite possessive and be like, I don't want everybody to know about them because they're mine and I quite like them. But then you also want them to do well because you believe in them, and you're like, it's not mine. I just feel like it's mine because I'm invested.
But make sure you're charging under 30 quid for gigs, please.
Well, yeah. They've got to make a living, everything. Yeah, it's hard.
Unfortunately, yeah. But yeah, I think at the time recording, Sunflower Bean would have played in Birmingham a couple of days ago. I need to get that ticket for that actually. And Yard Act, I was supposed to see Yard Act in January with the DIY.
Oh, I'd love to see them live again. You just know it'd be a great gig. Really good gig.
They were doing the DIY tour with Lion Garden and Panic Shack, and they're supposed to play like the 8th of January or something, but because of Omicron, that got postponed. It's now in September, which basically means that it gives me enough time to listen to the album actually, because the album's really good. So
very good, yeah.
So give the radio a read, and also give Here and Now a listen as well. The Here and Now is really, really good. As well, I found it quite informative and quite interesting. So yeah, and you can say it's livcowle.com that you can find them.
.com, yeah. So COWLE.
And with that, we are at the very end of our chat, and I'll just say, Liv, it's been great to have you on, and thank you very much.
Oh, Matt, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you just listened to, or maybe you're just about to listen to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling. Now, back to your scheduled programming. Elsewhere on We Made This. The Failed Critics Podcast.
This Leatherface isn't a young guy anymore. He's a big guy. He's an older guy. Like, just sprint a little bit up the road and shoot him. Like, he's got a big chainsaw as well, that if he's swinging it around, he's got to be careful with it or he's going to hurt himself. He's not going to be quick. Literally, some of them have got guns at some point in this film. Just sprint 20 yards up the road and shoot him.
There's a number of plot holes in this where the Hardesty character has the opportunity to point blank him and just doesn't do it. And it's just like, you've gone all this way, you've waited 50 years to see him again, and you could literally just blow his head off. Yeah. He's not posing any threat to you whatsoever. In fact, he's sat on his bed waiting for you to do something.
And then you have a little chat with him. So just blow him away.
Free with this month's issue.
Quite often, things that go fast is good.
But that's not, because it doesn't go really fast.
Yeah, just goes faster.
Yeah, and also when you've been ominously stalking, which is what that bass line does, it's just ominous, then going fast is not. You know, like Jason Voorhees doesn't run, does he? No.
He doesn't need to.
He remains ominous the whole time.
Yeah, but
that's what this song should have done.
He's not Jason Voorhees, he's the T-1000's brother.
And did the T-1000 run? Not really.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, a bit, but not
that
a lot.
Bit when he's fucking chasing after them in the car, he's definitely running.
Maybe
quite
that's
famously.
why he did it. You know what?
Geek Polymath.
I don't think I'm a geek because I'm gay, but I think it fucking helped.
Well, listen, so I have theories about this.
Good.
Strap in for a conspiracy session.
Please.
It's all to do with being an outsider, which, of course, as fingers crossed, as society progresses and advances, we will hopefully get to the stage where just sexuality will have nothing to do with you being an insider or an outsider, but it's massively a part of it. There's a reason Russell T Davies felt such a strong connection to Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I think those kind of outsider bubbles overlap.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.